All right, let's dive right into a really wild idea from the post-war era. I mean, just look at that title. Madness is civilization. It's a concept that came out of a world that was just grappling with things like conformity and the atom bomb, and it was an idea that completely turned psychiatry on its head and, believe it or not, helped fuel a cultural revolution.
Wow. Okay, let's just start by sitting with that for a second. This is from a Scottish psychoanalyst named R.D. Laing. What is he even saying here? He's suggesting that the one thing we all think is the bedrock of society, the loving family, can actually be a source of violence. It's a shocking, radical idea, and it's absolutely key to understanding the huge shift in thinking that happened back in the 1960s.
So this really is the big question for us today. How on earth did madness, a clinical, medical concept, break out of the asylum and become this powerful metaphor for everything people felt was wrong with the world? How did it become a weapon to critique the family, the Vietnam War, and the entire idea of what it means to be normal?
To answer that, we've got to rewind the clock a bit, back before the 60s counterculture really kicked off. Picture this. It's the post-World War II era. Everything is about conformity, the white picket fence, but behind the scenes, psychiatrists were stumped by this huge, terrifying puzzle. What actually causes a mind to break? What causes schizophrenia?
For years, the obvious answer seemed to be biological. It had to be, right? Something physical in the brain. So researchers looked at everything: brain chemistry, genetics, oxygen levels, you name it. And after years and years of searching, they found, well, pretty much nothing. Zilch. A top scientist basically said it was like searching for a needle in a massive haystack. So this failure created this huge intellectual vacuum. And as we know, nature abhors a vacuum. Something new and pretty radical was about to rush in.
And what rushed in to fill that void? Well, it was a totally mind-bending shift in focus. Researchers stopped looking at the brain under a microscope and started looking at the family in the living room. A whole new generation of thinkers started to ask, what if madness isn't something you're born with? What if it's something that's made right there in the home?
And this is where things get really intense. One of the first big theories to come out of this was the idea of the schizophrenic mother. Yeah, it's a mouthful. The theory was that a mother who is emotionally cold and rejecting could literally cause her child to develop schizophrenia. I mean, can you imagine? This is an era with intense pressure on women to be perfect homemakers, and now they're being told their behavior could be driving their kids insane. Just wow.
So the thinking started to get a little more sophisticated. It moved beyond just blaming mom and started looking at the whole family's communication style. And in 1956, an anthropologist named Gregory Bateson came up with this brilliant and terrifying theory called the double bind. The idea was that mental illness wasn't caused by one big trauma, but by this constant, inescapable, no-win situation created by how a parent talks to their child.
So what does a double bind actually feel like? Let me break it down. First, imagine you're a kid and you're getting mixed signals. Your mother says the words, "I love you," but her whole body is tense. Her tone is cold. You feel the opposite of love, right? Second, you're trapped. You can't call it out. If you say, "Hey, you don't seem like you love me," you risk getting that love taken away completely. And third, and this is the really scary part, when this happens over and over again, your own sense of reality starts to fall apart. You can't trust what you see or feel anymore. It's like you're literally being educated into insanity.
Get a load of this example from Bateson's own research. It's chilling. On the surface, the mother's comment sounds perfectly fine, even caring. But the researchers argued that no, the real, unspoken message was, "Get out of my face, I'm sick of you." The child hears one thing, feels another, and has absolutely nowhere to go with that contradiction. That is the subtle kind of violence that R.D. Laing was talking about.
Okay, so these ideas are bubbling up in academic circles, but who's the person that takes the mainstream? Enter R.D. Laing. This guy was not your typical stuffy psychoanalyst. He was charismatic, he was controversial, he was basically an intellectual rock star of the 1960s. And he's the one who took these clinical theories and just broadcast them to the entire world.
And what's really fascinating is watching Laing's own thinking do a complete 180. In his early work, he sees schizophrenia as this profound tragedy of loneliness. But just 7 years later, his view is completely different. Suddenly, madness isn't a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. It's a journey. In fact, he starts arguing it might be the only sane and rational response to a world that's gone completely mad.
And for young people in the 60s, feeling alienated by the Vietnam War and their parents' values, this idea was like lightning. The Politics of Experience sold millions and millions of copies. It wasn't some dry academic book anymore. It was basically a handbook for understanding why you felt so disconnected from everything.
Lang's whole method was to listen to the so-called gibberish his patients said and treat it like poetry, like code. Take his famous patient, Julie. She kept repeating the phrase, "A child has been murdered." Lang said she's not having a delusion, she's speaking a metaphor. The child that had been murdered was her true, authentic self, killed off by a family that was trying to force her to be someone she wasn't.
And here is where it all clicks into place. This is the big leap. The language that was invented to talk about dysfunctional families suddenly became the perfect language to talk about a dysfunctional society. The words from the therapist's office became weapons on the protest lines.
So you start seeing this logic pop up everywhere. People like Thomas Merton applied it to the Cold War. He asked, who's really insane here? The anxious kid protesting the bomb, or the sane politician calmly planning for global nuclear annihilation? In this new way of looking at things, being perfectly well-adjusted to a sick society was the real madness.
Or remember that idea of shamming, pretending everything is fine in the family when it's not? Well, another thinker, Jules Henry, looked at the Vietnam War and said, that's exactly what America's doing, proclaiming to the world that we're building a nation when everyone can see we're destroying one. It was the family lie now playing out on a global scale.
And this really brings it all full circle. One of Lang's associates, David Cooper, just laid it out there. The family, he said, is basically boot camp for an insane society. It's where we're trained to accept contradictions, to ignore our gut feelings, and to just go along with a system that feels fundamentally wrong.
So what you end up with is this powerful new toolkit for revolution. All that personal angst and unhappiness, it wasn't just your private problem anymore. It was political. This gave a whole generation the vocabulary to fight back against everything: their parents, the government, racism, sexism. Their alienation wasn't a personal failure. It was proof that they were a sane person in a pathological world.
But it's not that simple. Of course it's never that simple. As powerful as these ideas were culturally, the science they were built on, well, it was resting on some pretty shaky ground.
And this right here, this is the massive central flaw. The researchers almost never stopped to ask the most basic chicken and egg question. Did the bad family make the child sick? Or did the unbelievable stress of raising a severely mentally ill child create the dysfunction in the family? They might have had the whole thing completely backwards, an entire movement possibly built on a giant misinterpretation.
I love this quote from the author Angela Carter because she just nails it. She points out that these ideas didn't just explain alienation, they kind of romanticized it. R.D. Laing made hating your parents and feeling like an outsider, well, he made it glamorous. It became a badge of honor, a sign that you were one of the sensitive, sane ones in an insane world.
And so that leaves us with a big, messy question this whole movement unleashed on the world. And it's a question that feels maybe more relevant today than ever. If the systems we call normal, our society, our politics, our way of life, can be fundamentally sick, then what does it even mean to be sane? Is sanity just about adjusting to that sickness, or is real sanity about resisting it? That's the unsettling legacy of the time when madness became civilization.